Welcome to the National Council for Hypnotherapy podcast, where we dive into the fascinating world of hypnosis, lifting the lid on hypnotherapy, sharing insights and tips for change as we chat. So sit back, relax, and enjoy all the wonderful possibilities of hypnotherapy. My name is Tracy Grist, and I will be your host today. Hello, I'm here with Trevor Silvester, co-founder with Bex, his wife, of the Cognitive Hypnotherapy and Quest Institute. Trevor's author of 6 books and trains. You still training at Quest?
Yes, yeah. The Quest Institute is thriving. Still run one course a year.
Yeah, and how long have you been doing the training for now?
I think this is going to be our 2024? I think it's our 24th year.
Gosh,
I should find that easy to remember, really, shouldn't I? It's really beautiful. I'm dyslexic with numbers, so I have to be careful. But yeah, 24 years.
So what led you into hypnotherapy, into training, into Quest and cognitive?
Okay, well, I was a police officer and had been, for quite some time. And then I went to Hendon Training School as an instructor. And back then they had a really good system of training you as a teacher. So we went through quite an intense period of learning how to teach. And part of that was also coping with a kind of pastoral care, because it's an 18-week course, very intense, residential, mainly young people. So they taught us counseling and transactional analysis. And I just got really interested in, why people do what they do. I mean, as a cop, I already was, I suppose, but it just opened doors to me. And I thought it felt like coming home in a way. So I looked around at how I could learn more about this stuff. And I was limited because I was divorced and I had my children every weekend. So there weren't that many places that I could go to learn. So I found this guy wouldn't be possible now, but this is going back, nearly 30 years, where on a one-to-one basis, I went down to Kent and he trained me in hypnotherapy and psychotherapy through the NCH back as it was back then. And it gave me a good grounding in psychological and psychotherapy principles and theories, but didn't give me an awful lot. I ended up with 2 scripts, script A and script B. I once said to him, so what happens if script A doesn't work? And he looked at me like I was an idiot. And he said, well, you use script B. And that was the entirety of my preparation. So luckily I tripped over a neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, and went along on a practitioner and then the master practitioner, ended up going to California and training as a trainer. And just learned so much about Ericksonian hypnosis and obviously all of the brilliant techniques, but also how to really listen to people and realize that the answer to how you work with them comes from them, not from you. Mm-hmm. So that gave me a good kind of platform to begin to practice. And I did so for a number of years while I remained in the police. I worked evenings and weekends. And then when it was my time to leave Hendon, I knew I didn't want to be a cop anymore. I wanted to be a therapist. And so I made the leap and jumped. And I practiced for a few years. And then Bex wanted to leave as well. And we said, well, why don't we start a school? Thinking how hard can that be? And so we did. And we launched in 2000 with about 10 people. And it's just grown and expanded ever since. And now we've got over 200 practitioners practicing around the country and some internationally. And, it's a kind of a lovely family.
Yeah, lovely. And so you've gone down the cognitive hypnotherapy. So there are all different types of hypnotherapy. What led you towards cognitive?
Okay, I called it cognitive hypnotherapy when we founded the school because I did, as you say, there's lots of different approaches and I wanted to differentiate ours. And what really, I think, made a big difference was I read a book called Trances People Live by Stephen Walensky. Yeah. And he talked about how people's problems are the result of trance. That, if you have a dog phobia and you're walking along the street and you're in your normal state of mind and then you see a dog, your unconscious catapults you into this trance state in order to direct your behavior in the way that it thinks best. So it gets you to attack the dog, run away from the dog, or freeze in the presence of the dog. Classic fight, flight, or freeze. And that really blew my mind because it reversed the classic idea of hypnosis, where when people come to see me, instead of me having to hypnotize them to help them to recover from their issue, our job in a way is to discover how and why the trance is created, and then dehypnotize them from it.
Yeah.
Find out what needs to change in their mind for them to remain their normal self in the presence of a dog, or in the presence of food, or a cigarette, or the situation that makes them anxious or depressed. And so that, plus the lovely idea from Erickson that people have all the answers, that they're not broken, you don't need to fix them. And it's your job to listen and figure out where the solution lies within their problem. And when you do that, really life becomes easier for you as a therapist, because you're just nudging them towards their own answers. And that was the catalyst for cognitive hypnotherapy. And I really didn't like the way therapy was going. It seemed to be becoming very prescriptive about trying to fit people into labels, into boxes, that you are anxious, you are depressed. And then this is the treatment protocol. You see this particularly in CBT. And once you recognize that everybody is different, and NLP gave me the eyes for that, everybody sees the world in slightly or greatly different ways. How could one script or one treatment program possibly help everybody who just happens to share the same label? So in cognitive hypnotherapy, we don't really use labels much at all. If I see 6 people with anxiety, I'm going to say, how do you do your anxiety? And they're going to tell me the shape and pattern of how they do theirs. And from that, I'm going to create a treatment program based on a combination of techniques from any approach, from Gestalt, from NLP, from CBT. Literally, and everyone I teach will just fit it into that person's model of the world to help them move forward in their own way. So that's really what cognitive therapy is about and how it's different.
So rather than coming from the ailment, you're coming from the person and working with the person.
Yeah.
Their particular ailment is.
Absolutely, because so often...
An ailment.
That's a good old-fashioned word, isn't it? Well, obviously we made them a poultice as well. Yes, so often people come through the door and what they say is the problem is only a symptom of the deeper problem. Yeah. I've been a therapist, I don't know, it's knocking on now for towards 30 years, I suppose. And I think ultimately what people are mainly suffering from is their relationship to themselves. They have a poor relationship with who they think they are. And that's because I think we live in a toxic culture, which from the very beginning tries to tell us that there's something wrong with us so they can sell us a cure, whether it's the right car, the right perfume, the right job, the right school, there are kids, all these badges of success we have to wear in order to be okay. Whereas the truth is we are okay. And any belief that we're not is just rubbish that our culture throws at us to try to keep us on the straight and narrow of being good citizens, which means, like the Matrix, being batteries for us to be exploited from. So, a client can come to see a cognitive therapist with anything, like nail biting or weight issues or addictions, whatever it might be. And they can be helped just for that one thing. But it becomes much more interesting when they begin to see that actually this is just the way their brain is trying to defend them and keep them safe from this manifestation of something is wrong with me compared to other people.
Yeah. Yeah. So in terms of, like, if you could give a top tip to everyone, is it around, waking up and thinking, I'm good? Or what would you...
Oh, wow. Okay. So you mean for the public, a top tip?
Yeah. Like, I think knowing ourselves is really important.
It is.
Understanding what our pressures are.
I would say there's a concept of a thing called ELOC and ILOC, where ELOC is having an external locus of control. This means that how we feel is pretty much a product of what is happening around us. And then there's ILOC, which is internal locus of control, which says, I'm in control of how I respond to the world. Now, our culture wants us to be ELOC. It wants us to say, I don't feel good today. What can be done for me to make me feel better? Yeah, what pie can I eat? What chocolate? What thing can I buy in a shop? All the different remedies that we are sold, rather than actually saying, what can I do today to be in control of my responses? Because no one can make you angry or sad or unhappy It's a choice your unconscious mind is making in response to what's happening to you. And this has been known since at least the Stoics. It's not what happens to you, it's what you make of it. So I think the top tip I can give is journal, really. Journal about your day and look through this lens of ELOC and ILOC and say, how many times was control taken away from me? How many times did I not feel I was in control of my choices? And then what could I do if that happens tomorrow differently? That would mean I do remain in control as best I can. Some things are out of control and we have to accept that. But an awful lot of times we're just being persuaded that's the case. And that's to keep us docile and in control, which is why so many people are unhappy in their jobs and depressed and anxious, because they don't realize they have choices they could make, which just aren't acceptable to the mainstream. So if you journal on that basis and just keep asking, how was I manipulated today? And how many times did I say, no, I'm going to choose to do this. This is my action. Then gradually you build a greater sense of control over your life. And research shows that this feeling of having efficacy, of having empowerment over your actions is one of the key antidotes to depression and anxiety. And raising our children to feel that way. One of the books that I wrote is called Grow, Personal Development for Parents. And it's about how to raise your child resiliently so that they do feel that they have this agency as they move through the world. And then they won't get lured into TikTok trends and, all the stuff that they're being bombarded with to make themselves feel okay.
Yeah, I think as a parent, children with agency is a nightmare.
It is. It makes you a difficult teen.
Yeah.
It means it makes you a challenging teenage years, but they're not still living with you at 40. That's the difference.
True. Unless you're living in London.
Unless you're living in, yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that agency bit I'm quite keen on, and an element of transactional analysis, the drama triangle and rescuer and helper and persecutor, and coming out of that and taking responsibility.
Yeah.
What can we be responsible for? Well, we can be responsible for our actions.
Yeah. And I think compassionate responsibility is important. To be responsible for your actions, but not to beat yourself up when those actions don't fit your ideal of you. To forgive yourself and say, I wasn't quite on it today. I'll do better tomorrow. Every day is a reset. You don't have to wake up and be the same person you were yesterday. It's another choice we have. Who shall I be today that was better than yesterday? And it's only Maria Sawar is a wonderful positive psychologist, and she just talks about how could I make today 3% better?
Yeah.
And just those kind of small, manageable chunks, instead of this magical waving of a wand and suddenly you're transformed. Just do the work. Just tab it out. Don't go from couch to 10K in 10 minutes. What's the rush? Build up. We have a saying in CogHip about how with a client, very often when our students graduate, they're really evangelical and they want to save the world, and so they might throw too much at a client in one go. And I'm left-handed, and so most implements don't work for me. And I was always in awe at how Bex could cut a slice of bread perfectly each and every time. Really annoyed me because I would go at that bread, I've got a knife, I'm strong, I'm a bloke, it's going to bend to my will. And there'd be crumbs everywhere and different slice thicknesses and left-handedness. And I realized that what you have to do is cut at the speed of the bread. The bread has a speed at which it wants to be cut, and you've got to match that. And it's the same with a client. We might have the greatest techniques in the world, but if you apply them at a pace that doesn't suit the client, change isn't going to happen, and you'll probably scare the client away. So I think with ourselves as well, we need to cut at the speed of the bread, change at the speed that feels possible for us, not at the speed we're told to or that other people are changing. Because we're okay as we are, which means that the speed we change at is okay too. Everything is.
Yeah, but also I think we're trained. We have all of this knowledge that people are coming to see us for, and we're looking into their maps. And if I went to the gym and my gym instructor said, right, Tracy, do more than tie your shoelaces. Here's a weight to lift. It would crush me immediately.
Yeah, it would.
They've learned all the techniques to do it. That's why it's so important to go, because we forget, I think because essentially it's all psychological learning and psychological knowledge, we sort of ingest it in a different way, and we don't realize that perhaps we've got this learning and our client doesn't know about family dynamics or relational stuff, but it becomes sort of integral to us. It becomes our water, and there's the presumption that people do know about these things, whereas most, I didn't know about it before training.
No, we don't. And I think an awful lot of therapy is just education, but not an education where we say this is the way to think, but offering them different models of ways to think, and you find the one that makes them nod and go, oh wow, yeah, that's for me. For some people it might be a Freudian model, other people it might be a more Gestaltian model, but something will make them go, yeah, that fits the way I feel about this world. And then they can begin to grow from there and educate themselves. Because ultimately, I think our role as a therapist is to make ourselves redundant to the client. They come to see me in an e-locked frame of mind where they say, I'm paying you money, fix me. I get them to a point where they recognize that this is you and I working together to get where you want to go. And then after a while, they realize that they don't need me anymore. They can do it all on their own. And then they fire me. And that's success. It's not me holding their hand for the next 20 years. Every time they hit a bump in the road, it's giving them access to their own resources that make them able to access them when they need them.
And I think I had something really profound to say, which has escaped my mind.
Doesn't it happen? Once you get into your 40s, it just starts to happen. It is with me.
30s.
Sorry.
It's me. Every day. And I think, because I think that's one of the myths, isn't it, of hypnotherapy, that people come for a magic wand.
Yeah.
Because why wouldn't you, when you look at stage work or hypnotherapy and hypnotherapy, hypnosis, and that difference of actually coming and working together, working with your therapist for
yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think in many ways, stage hypnosis, it did us a favor because it made people believe that what we do works, but it also set up this unrealistic expectation. We click our fingers, the lights would go out and they'd wake up cured. And so we have to negotiate that narrow tightrope, really, of their expectation versus what their experience is going to be. And especially with cognitive hypnotherapy, I haven't done a trance induction in I don't know how many years, because they talk themselves into trance the minute they start describing their problem. They start talking about last week or last year, and that's age regression. They start in their mind reliving it. That's positive hallucination. These are all trance phenomena that are part of the network of how they go into their issues. So the great thing about this approach and not seeing hypnosis as a special state is that there's nobody who can't be hypnotized because they're doing it to themselves. I don't need them to dance like a chicken. I don't need that stage hypnosis kind of gig. I just need them to be able to re-access the thing that they want to change about themselves, and everybody can do that.
Well, and also, to me, that's the key component of the therapy, is that autonomy, control of you. Nobody else is in control of you.
Yeah.
You're in control of you. And when you realize that you're in control and you can choose to reframe, rethink, reaccess something that is just ordinary to you, and you can make it different, then that confidence builds that you're in control and you have that.
Yeah. I mean, to teach them a simple technique like spinning, where you take just a simple shape that represents their issue, so say their fear, and I always start by making it worse, because people always believe they can make something worse. And so their fear of dogs, and they spin it and it goes from an 8 to a 9, and they're frothing and hyperventilating, and then you bring it back down to an 8 and they realize they had control of that. And then once they realize that, they can bring it down to a 6 and a 4 and a 3, and suddenly the next time they see a dog, they can just do that technique on their own without me, and suddenly they have more control over the dog. And this is what we should be teaching this in schools. Kids should be taught about emotional regulation and their choice over how they react to things. Yeah. But of course it doesn't suit.
No. And it's that point, isn't it, between like the stimulus and the reaction point.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. In that half second, what's going in the mind, which is different for every single person. Everyone who's scared of a dog has a different point of origin for that, a different story. And mostly it's to do with a dog that they've had a bad transaction with when they were younger. But sometimes it might not be. It might be watching TV and something that was dog-like scared them. I had one person, it was a dream they had, so, and we don't know if this is true, but it's true for them. And that's all that really matters. We work with their truth to come up with their belief in their solution, which isn't true either, but it works better.
And as a dog walking person, I take Bear out and he's a black dog, so he looks a little bit more intimidating, fluffy. And
you can't see the eyes quite so easily. So,
and he does look like a bear, I have to say.
Right.
And you can see when people are walking towards us, if we're on a street, you can see people who are intimidated or scared or phobic. Phobics usually cross the road.
Yeah.
People who are, and you can see different response levels, and they've noticed Bear as they're walking towards me. They're watching, they're not looking at me, they're looking at Bear, and you can see that there's a dialogue attached to that. Is it going to do? What do I do? And just in that dynamic, that language of their own around.
They're in a trance, aren't they? They've taken themselves into a trance where they're projecting onto Bear their thoughts about a dog.
Yeah. And so people who don't have that response just walk past, or they're like, "Oh my God, Bear!" Or there's so many other responses, but you can see it, and you want to sort of go, "Hello, come out of your scary trance."
Yes, meet this actual dog, not this actual dog.
Yeah, but and that's the thing. Also, I find that particularly with phobias, people are too frightened to go and face their phobias because they think that it is about, I must have a dog here. Like exposure therapy.
Exposure therapy, yeah. God, why?
Yeah.
Just don't need it. And again, this projection goes on all day long, doesn't it? People who meet you and they find out you're the chair of the NCH, they're going to suddenly project any issues they've got about with authority onto you without them even realizing they're doing it. They're not meeting Tracy anymore. They're meeting this person. I sometimes get this funny response from people that we interview for the course where they've seen me on the screen. And so suddenly there's some kind of otherness about me, so they're nervous at meeting me, and I'm just me. And so I think, what's wrong with you? And then I realize it's not anything wrong with them. It's just what they're making of me. So luckily I'm a numpty, and they pretty soon realize that, and snaps them out of their trance.
I open my mouth. Oh, okay.
Yes.
Nice.
But it's the same, isn't it? When people are at work, they project onto their work colleagues and onto their bosses and things, and what they project will either be a positive because of past associations or negatives. And so we can help them update that software, really, so they can meet people as in the moment, genuinely. Not, I think Gerald Edelman described now as the remembered present, that half the time what we think is us being present is actually still us reliving past experiences through different people, and that's an awful mistake to make. So much better when you can just meet somebody genuinely as this blank slate for them to say, this is who I am.
But then that comes round in full circle, doesn't it? About whether we're internally flexible or mental, because actually meeting people without our stereotypes or our cognitive biases, all of those things that keep us safe, quite vulnerable. If we've got somebody we don't know who they are or what, we're just trusting that they're a blank slate that we're yet to understand.
It is. It's. I think that's the process of therapy as a lifelong journey for each person, is figuring out what biases are working for me and which ones aren't, and which ones need updating and which ones keep me safe. And that's a constant shuffle, isn't it? And to be alive to that need is really important. I came out of the police with all kinds of biases about certain groups of people, as you can imagine. And then I worked with Kids Company for 3 years, and I was meeting all these amazing youngsters. And my old police spider sense would go off when some of them walked in, with their trousers around their asses and all kinds of attitudes about the police.
My
And
son.
I told them straight away that's who I was. That's who I used to be. And we would work through that. And I just met these wonderful young people trying their hardest to get themselves out of an environment they didn't ask for, and with so few choices because of, the way our society is structured. And it was fascinating for me to sit and feel my spider sense go off and then go, but is this true of this person in front of me? And of course, 99.9% of the time it wasn't. So I wouldn't abandon it always. I would pay attention to it, but I would also update it with the person in front of me as best I could. And I think we all need to do that.
And it's having that flexibility, isn't it?
Mm.
I think there's so much in the self-help that we're fed that we need to be going this linear process to self-enlightenment, become like the perfect person who never makes mistakes, a robot.
Yeah.
Rather than saying, actually, this is about flexibility. It's about, how flexible can I be in the face of trauma, in the face of drama, in the face of challenge, like in my mind, how flexible can I be?
Ruma Bettino introduced me to that idea of being perfectly imperfect. Yeah. And it's such a release just to go, I'm always going to be imperfect. And that's how I'm supposed to be. But, if you want the job, keep trying to improve. If you don't want the job, crack on, but I think it gives us a purpose to try to be better than we were yesterday, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And makes us happier as well.
3%.
3%, yeah.
That's it. Yeah, yeah. So what's future plans then for Trevor Silvester?
Oh, blimey. Well, I'm 65 this year, which back in...
Hey?
Bless you. That was nearly genuine. So for my generation, that's kind of the age that you retire, isn't it? But I don't know what retirement really is. I had long COVID for 4 years, and that gave us both the need to make me replaceable within Quest, and also gave me the platform within which I could. So we future-proofed Quest for quite some years to come, where I can be less involved in it day to day, and it still runs as well, because I've trapped everything that I used to teach in the room online, so people can watch it as many times as they need to before they come into class, and then they get more practice. So the course is actually even better than it used to be. So that gives me freedom to go off and explore other things that interest me, and I'm interested in so many things. I paint. I've recently started writing poetry again. I'm interested in the spiritual. So I trained in Sweden in shamanism. I'm interested in the overlap between therapy and shamanism. And also I think this need to reconnect us to things greater than us. I think part of what is our problem in our culture is this great disconnect with nature and with people. We're the most electronically connected people who've ever lived, yet the most personally disconnected who've ever lived, probably. We were driving out of Bath the other day at school kick-out time, and we saw all these school kids coming home, and they were in their early teens, probably. And most of them were walking on their own. Nearly all of them had earbuds in, and nearly all of them were looking at their phones. And it was a sunny day, and they walked past trees that were blossoming, and there were birds singing, and they were cut off from all of that, but they were also cut off from the 3D experience of each other. I'd have walked home with my mates, and we'd have kicked a can or something on the way, and, instead they're whatever they're doing on their phone, but it isn't face-to-face contact, and I think we need to get back to that. Yeah. And I think that's an element of spirituality. So I don't know, really. I'm just everything. I always thought when I did painting, I thought that was going to take me away from therapy, and it opened another door, which brought me back with new insights about therapy. Shamanism has been exactly the same thing. So I think I'm just going to keep on looping, going back out as a student, and then bringing it back in to where I'm ready to teach something new. Maybe I really don't know, but I'm enjoying the looping. And Tad James once said how important it was to read outside your field. And I used to think he just meant Don't just read therapy, read sociology and read, things akin, but not within. And I found that tremendously useful. But now I found the most remotely linked things are still connected, because therapy is just about this experience of being human, and how can we be better at that? So yeah, I'm just going to be, as best I can, just looping student, teacher, or maybe just student, student, student. I don't know.
Yeah, I think we're perpetual students. But I suppose it comes down to that flexibility, doesn't it? The
Yeah, it does.
creativity, and then consolidating that learning in the cycle.
Yeah. I think being constantly uncertain, I think, is actually a strength. I don't want my brain to turn into concrete and say, this, at last I found the truth, because that's a kind of death. I think I want to be 120 and on my deathbed go, no, I haven't finished this book yet. I want to just stay open. So you need to meet, you need to meet new people for that. And you need to come across new ideas, and Quest, we brought in new people to be teaching it, because if I sit at the top of the Quest pyramid, I'm going to squash it. New insights and new ways of looking at things. The younger generation see the world differently to me, and that needs to be reflected in what we offer, because otherwise I'm just going to be this old bloke teaching young people stuff that doesn't resonate with them. So we need to change the voices to make therapy new for each new generation coming through. Permanent revolution. That's what we use as a strapline within Quest at one point.
Yeah, I think it's that, isn't it? Like when you see the kids on the phones and not doing the friendship thing, and actually, what's the benefit? What are the good things?
Yeah. And their loneliness and the pressure on them to conform to what they think they're supposed to be. The lack of, or rather the uniformity of the uniform was even greater than in my day. A lot of it, to my old eyes, really sexualized. And you think, where is the pressure from this coming? And it's probably on that screen, isn't it?
Yeah, I kind of think it goes back to shopping centres being the new church. And
it is consumerism, isn't it? It's this commodifying everything. That's, I think, what we need, and that's what's killing the planet. And we see this in therapy as well. Somebody comes up with a new idea, and within a couple of weeks, it's being turned into this commodity with fences around it that you got to buy into just to get this new idea that could help everybody. And then all these new catchphrases that come along. I've had 30 years of hearing the latest thing becoming the thing instead of just another thing and just another possibility. Trauma informed, I think, is probably the latest. Everybody's trauma informed. What on earth does that mean even? But at its heart has tremendous benefit. Gabor Mate's work is fantastic. But suddenly we got to wear these badges to keep up with trends. So we're no different to these school kids walking home. It's all this, we've got to break free of this commodification of
back to what are my values, what's myself, without being told what your values should be.
Yeah. And if you're okay with yourself, that's possible, isn't it? That's why we need to teach kids okayness as their default position. A thing that I've learned from my studies over the last 5 years into shamanism and indigenous truths is that that's pretty much been how indigenous cultures raise their children, that however you are when you're born is perfect for the tribe. And it's the tribe's purpose to find your place within it. So it adapts for you. And instead, we're born with this kind of idea of original sin, and then we're measured against everybody and everything, constantly thinking we have to jump through these hoops to be acceptable to others. Wouldn't it be great if kids didn't have that kind of pressure and they could just, in Finland, I don't think they teach you're taught anything until you're 7. You're just out making mud pies. Let's have more of that kind of way of being in the world, instead of just trying to get kids on a conveyor belt into a life that the parents are probably unhappy living themselves. So why do we keep inducting them into this cult?
Yeah, it's the difficulty, I think, with every sort of parent position is it's difficult going against such a big wave.
Yeah.
Because the children are being sold this wave from all angles of consumerism, and how prepare them otherwise and keep them connected to society, because
but I am hopeful. There are, these the schools now that are doing wilderness schools. I think are a great thrust forward. I see. We met a young lad walking dogs yesterday in the woods, and we just stopped and had a chat with him. And he's probably early 20s, and he was brilliant. In his connectedness to things and to his dogs, and it comes away every time you meet a young person who isn't lost in a phone. You realize there's always going to be people who are inoculated against that and are still called to follow whatever it is within them that's calling to them, instead of drowning it out with social media. I'm still hopeful, but I don't want to sound like Martin Luther King, but I do think a change is going to come.
Well, I think in some ways it has to. You can see by the state of the planet. We've disconnected from nature, how we've disconnected and gone into this consumerist, use the nature for our benefit. And, one would hope that has peaked, probably with our generation young. And
I hope so.
Maybe that reconnect will help.
It's why I really think, and I've been preaching this a lot just recently to my students, that therapy or being a therapist is social activism. Because if we can help the clients who come to us who are unhappy with their life to realize that unhappiness comes from this learned unhappiness about themselves being not okay. And if we can get them to become more ILOC, then in a way, just like Neo in the Matrix, you can start unplugging yourself from the battery pack that society wants you to be, and say, what do I want to choose my life to be like? And I think I'll have that from society, but I'm not going to have that or that or that. And if enough people unplug, then society has to change. It will no longer function in the way that it does. And maybe we can just invert it a little bit and stop this drive for inequality that is at the moment seems endless and that's going to kill us all. That's, changing the world one person at a time, I think, is the best that we can hope for as therapists.
But also seeing that things are changing, seeing that there's more acceptance in individuals, like with the Black Lives Matters movement and equal pay.
Absolutely. The changes in my lifetime have been massive. So, yes, you've got to hope. And of course, there's the pushback. The moment, the whole discussion around trans rights is the latest flashpoint. But I think it's still just a sign of progress that whenever the pendulum moves, there's always a pressure to try to move it back from those people who are scared by what it represents to them. And they're only scared because they've been taught that it's scary. And if they can only open up their eyes to see, difference is the only thing that unites us. We're all different, and that's got to be okay. And we can use it to unite us instead of using it to other people, because that's what the elites try to do. They try to other people who are much more similar to us than we are to them. And so we fight amongst ourselves about stuff that really doesn't matter. The England badge this weekend, was crazy. I don't know if you saw it. People are up in arms. I got slaughtered on Facebook about calling it a little nonsense. It's the destruction of our civilization, having a flag that wasn't red and white. Well, it wasn't 20 years ago they did it and nobody said a word, but somebody out there says, right, here's another thing to cause strife with. And we do this, and we don't argue about the fact the shirt costs 120 quid. And is probably made in a sweatshop in the Far East. That's what we should be angry about. Not the flag, but it's all distraction and smoke and mirrors.
I can't remember the quote. Was it a Bedouin quote where fight with your brother until your neighbour comes along, then you both fight with your neighbour? It was something like that.
It'd be great if you could love your brother and then until the neighbour comes along, and then love your neighbour as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
At every polyamorous person.
Yes.
And their wives and their sister. No, come back.
No.
Oh, well, it's been lovely talking to you today.
And you too, as always.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Oh, bless your heart.
much, Trevor.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me rant.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.